Well, the Thabo Bester escape has raised many questions about private-public partnerships. G4S Security ran Mangaung Correctional Centre, where Bester escaped from. Now, the company has been denying that Bester escaped, but will the company be held responsible? And more broadly, is there sufficient oversight and even responsibility of PPPs? Now, let's speak to governance analyst Harlan Cloete joins me now to take this discussion forward. And thank you so much for your time, Harlan. That's precisely the question. I mean, will G4S be held accountable for the events leading up to Thabo Bester's, I suppose, escape and now arrest?
Good morning, good afternoon at least to you, Tumelo, as well as the viewers. No, South Africans demand accountability. You know, in the spirit of good corporate governance, somebody must take responsibility for what has happened at that correctional institution.
I mean, what do you understand just in terms of G4S? If we were to bring the company into context and their relationship with government, them receiving this contract to date, what kind of a relationship do you understand, Harlan, that G4S has shared with the Department of Correctional Services and Justice?
My understanding, and I haven't read it in depth, the understanding is that they manage this correctional facility as a public-private partnership. But again, there has to be oversight. There is oversight and checks and balances. In other words, if the state cannot abdicate that responsibility fully. It hands over this correctional institution and say, you manage it on our behalf. And so there has to be checks and balances. You know, management's role is to ensure that the conditions of the contracts that are met. And when this story broke, you know, my immediate reaction was that this must be an inside job. It was a well-orchestrated affair, because remember, Thabo Bester has apparently burned to death about a year ago. And so somebody must have, this must have been an inside job. There must have been some sort of a collaboration between insiders and outsiders to make this thing happen.
But also we have found, particularly with this case, that G4S's reputation is one that is definitely under disrepute. I mean, if you look at the international company from where they're based, head offices in Britain, in the UK, our correspondent telling us there, Ollie Barrett, that there has been issues. There've been issues with, of course, G4S. When we come back home, there've been letters written to President Cyril Ramaphosa reporting on some of the lawlessness taking place in the prison, but it seems G4S allegedly suppressed those letters, especially from getting to the president. So the question then begs is, why would, government continue this relationship with the company if this is their reputation, or perhaps were they just as blindsided as the rest of the country?
I think the problem is, one Michael Atkins wrote that we call about a predictable surprise. Sometimes government sits on information. Sometimes they've got all the knowledge of what is wrong, but simply fail to act. And we've said on these platforms so many times that there's a problem in our country in terms of implementation, and there's also a problem when it comes to ethical and accountable leadership. Now, that's on both sides of the fence. Often, society and the business sector are quick to point a finger at government for being corrupt, but it takes two to tango. In this case, if we talk about corruption in South Africa, then you must also at the same time talk about corporate corruption, business corruption. And so there's a problem with leadership, there's a problem of implementation, there's a problem of sometimes just a lack of will to implement recommendations that come from commissions. There are so many examples where leaders in authority have had this information, but simply refuses to act for reasons that is not known to me. But there seems to be a lack of will to want to implement or to take recommendations from commission seriously.
Yeah. So moving forward, with that being said, what should be the next step to ensure that G4S does indeed account?
I think we must learn lessons from this, and not make, Einstein said the definition of insanity is making the same mistake over and over again. I think we must, this points a finger at management, at oversight. One would think that there's monthly reporting, that these matters are highlighted, whoever's managing this contract on behalf of government should be more vigilant, but it should be a red flag to all government departments that you cannot outsource responsibility. You know, accountability you cannot outsource. I can outsource the responsibility to a outside company, but ultimately the government remains accountable. The role of the state is to look after the welfare and to protect its citizens. So it cannot now say, but under us, we didn't know. It should be a red flag to us, you know, to be more vigilant and to make sure that we receive evidence. One author once said, you know, in God we trust, everybody else must bring evidence. And so we need an evidence-based policy decision making. We need to make sure that there are checks and balances and that we move forward.
Yeah. You know, Harlan, when you speak about the lessons that can be learned from this, I just wonder if, obviously with the spotlight placed on public-private partnerships, could this jeopardize such, you know, partnerships for government? I mean, there seems to be a lack of trust now, even from South Africans. Earlier on, when I spoke to Calvin Rafferty, a forensic investigator, he said to me, listen to me, there's a whole world inside prisons involving gangs, and sometimes even these wardens are part of these gangs, whether because they do benefit financially or because they fear for their lives, perhaps because they are exposed to a lot of sensitive information. But again, it begs the question, what then happens to the future of public-private partnerships in South Africa?
I think if they're better managed, you know, this is not the first, you know, correctional services. You remember the Bosasa incident with the Watsons. So there's, in theory, the public-private partnership could work really in a very dynamic way. It's the way they are managed. It's the underhandedness. It's like you now just said, you know, there is the surface and below the surface matters. It's the criminal underworld and money being exchanged and favors, etc. And so we sit with a problem of corruption in society, and the only way to get out of this mess is ethical and accountable leadership at all levels of our society. But I also want to say corruption is almost endemic of the South African society. It didn't start in 1994. It is almost part of the DNA of our country. And to break this cycle, we have to appeal to leaders and to make sure that our institutions, as articulated in the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to build strong institutions. And strong institutions are built by credible men and women who are credible, ethical, and value the principles of accountability.
Right. Before I let you go, Harlan, I have to remind you, I'm sure you would have seen and heard that G4S constantly denied that Thabo Bester escaped. They stuck to their guns that Thabo Bester had not escaped. As a matter of fact, the remains found in his cell belonged to him. And that begs the credibility of G4S. And one wonders, how did they conduct their oversight in this particular case? How did they back their evidence in constantly denying that Thabo Bester escaped? And I just wonder what your thoughts are on a company that has, you know, publicly denied and now only to find that not only is he alive but rearrested in Tanzania.
Yeah. If somebody denies, somebody else covers up for that person. I saw a video where Thabo Bester had a white shirt, and there was an event in Sandton where people sang happy birthday to him while he was supposedly in prison. So if somebody says the man is, yes, then somebody else must verify. I can't just take it by the person's word. And so for me, it points at there was collusion. There was a clearly well thought out plan and cover up to make sure that the world believes that Mr. Bester is still in prison. And so again, it shows to the management, the oversight, the accountability, and then ultimately the leadership problem that we have.
Yeah. And do you wonder if there were many other cases that perhaps we don't know of, similar to Thabo Bester, where... Yeah, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think they are similar. You know, if you look at, I read a report this weekend of the crisis in education. If you look at the crisis in education, if you look at the crisis in health, if you look at the crisis in the police services, in the criminal justice system, we have a problem, and I'm a naturally optimistic person. But somehow, it looks like the center cannot hold, and really, this is a wake-up call to South Africans. If it wasn't for the vigilance of the media, people like yourselves, we would have still been led down this alley thinking that Thabo Bester has passed. But we must be so grateful for the vigilance of the media, people like yourselves, that keep government to account, that keep on asking questions. And that's why South African democracy is vibrant, it's alive, and the media plays a huge part in making sure that this accountability comes to fore.
All my thanks to you. Harlan Cloete, governance analyst, thank you so much for taking this conversation forward.